Dan Aykroyd was a huge part of my childhood, and the nostalgia is thick. From the Ghostbuster films that he wrote and starred in, to his performance as Roman in The Great Outdoors, these are films that will live with me forever. From Blues Brothers to Dragnet, Trading Places, Coneheads, Saturday Night Live, My Girl, to The Twilight Zone, the man is on another level. He's also one of the most fascinating, intriguing, encyclopedic treasure troves of a man. When it comes to all things UFOs, aliens, abductions, paranormal, mediums, spiritualism, Bigfoot, vodka, cars, and the really obese indigenous people who lived at the base of the Niagara Falls because they never had to hunt, they just scooped up all the carcasses that went over the falls and then cooked it up for dinner. That's how you get super fat. I mean, forget about the Dos Equis guy. This guy, Dan Aykroyd, is truly the most interesting man in the world. Hello everyone and welcome to Nocturnal Horrors. Last night I went out for a walk and I listened to the Joe Rogan podcast and he had Dan Aykroyd as his guest. And I gotta tell you, this was an exquisite 2.5 hours. If you don't have 2.5 hours though to listen to this, I'm gonna abbreviate some of it and let you know some of the real interesting things that you can look up and really do some research on because these guys talked about some incredible things. Aykroyd goes into these super long moments of monologue in which he just rifles off all this information and you have no idea where it's all coming from. And even Joe Rogan was like, I just want you guys to know, listeners out there who are on iTunes or Spotify, that this guy has brought no notes. This is all off the top of his head. He knows all those things that you really want to go into and research. He's got it all on the top of his head. It just comes spewing out and it's just amazing to listen to. As a kid, his mom worked in aviation for the government, I think the Canadian government, and one day she thought she saw a UFO. So around the house they would always have these magazines and books about UFOs and aliens, and as a small boy, little Danny always read these things and was always around them. His great-grandfather supposedly had weekly seances that one day, as Mr. Aykroyd woke up, he decided to write Ghostbusters. Those seances were his inspiration for Ghostbusters. Dan Aykroyd himself actually had a house in which he later sold to Beverly D'Angelo, but before he did that, he was asleep one night when he felt something lie down next to him in his bed. And in typical Aykroyd fashion, he said, why stir the pot? Why get involved with something like that? Let's just roll over and go to sleep. And he went to sleep. UFOs have made 4 appearances for this one gentleman. I mean, come on, one of which was in Martha's Vineyard. I mean, what a life this guy leads. What I'm trying to say here is that the man has stories. And I think it's very important for us to listen to some of these stories. Now, what he does here is relay a lot of information in this podcast that are not his stories, but they are occurrences that have happened. And I gotta tell you, there's so many great ones to research, so I'm gonna just rifle off a bunch of them that I think you should really get into and look into and let your mind go. Just have fun with it. First of all, he's got his own vodka called Crystal Head Vodka, which they filter by pouring it over semi-precious crystals known as the Herkimer diamonds. He talks about the Great Blondine, the French tightrope walker who crossed the Niagara carrying his agent on his back, or the time he stopped halfway across the Niagara and it cooked an omelet there. He literally brought a stove and cooked an omelet there. Give me a break. Betty and Barney Hill out of New Hampshire were considered the first widely publicized people to be abducted by aliens. They saw a craft and 8 or 11 aliens and went into an altered state of consciousness and traveled miles without realizing it, had nightmares and went through hypnotherapy, you name it. Or the Linda case, where a woman named Linda was actually seen floating up into a spaceship in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Multiple independent witnesses saw this. The Phoenix Lights that were seen by thousands of people on March 13, 1997. The invasion of Washington, where several sightings were seen in July of 1952 in DC and over the White House even. They talk about Project Blue Book, which was an operation from the United States Air Force to debunk all things aliens and UFOs. They talk about Bob Lazar, whether or not he was full of shit, and whether or not he has element 115. And what about the 4 gentlemen who were abducted from Allagash, Maine back in 1976, and they used hypnotic regression to realize what they had experienced when they were abducted. Pro beach volleyball player Gabrielle Reese had a Sasquatch sighting. Apparently there are werewolves in Maine who trap people inside cabins. What? The mysterious Marfa lights of Texas, which apparently you can go to and see every single night. There's Bill Myers' UFO photos, there's the Fox sisters and spiritualism, the Calvin Parker incident, the Herb Shermer incident in Nebraska, Iranian fighter pilots seeing things in 1976 as they're in the air and then their jets malfunction, Jan Harzen playing with little aliens in her backyard in Florida. Or how about Arthur Findlay College, where you can actually go to learn how to be a medium or psychic. There's the debunking of John Edwards, the psychic medium, and Kirlian photography, otherwise known as aura photography. Dan Aykroyd is a man who believes the consciousness lives on after death. He calls himself an eternal researcher, but I call him a blessing and a treasure. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. We got 31 days of October, of Halloween, of horror, of HorrorTube, of Horrorween, whatever you want to call it, but it's coming. It's right around the corner. And please, do yourself a favor. Do some of the research on some of these stories and incidents that Dan Aykroyd talks about because they're incredible. A lot of them might be very well full of shit, but they are nevertheless always enjoyable. Thanks, guys.